A dragon beaten for birthing daughters finds hope when a lone human beekeeper defies an entire brood to stand by her side. Subscribe now to witness this tale of fire, courage, and the bond that changed everything. The first blow landed against her scales with a sickening crack, and the sound echoed across the canyon where the tribe had gathered to watch their judgment carried out. Drashra did not cry out though the force made her stumble forward, claws tearing furrows into the red earth. Beneath her wings the males towered around her, armored in iron and tradition, their voices rising in contempt as if their rage itself could peel away her dignity. "You have shamed the brood," one bellowed, his chest scarred from battles that had earned him rank for daughters, "and not a single ere you waste our fire, you waste our blood." The crowd snarled their contempt. A ring of dragons, both young and old, had come to witness the disgrace of a mother who had failed her one sacred duty. To produce a son, their eyes gleamed with cruel fascination, as though her humiliation fed them more than meat or flame. Another strike fell, and the force drove her to her knees. Dust plumed around her body, wings folding tight in instinctive defense. She tasted blood on her tongue. But what seared her more than pain was the laughter of those who should have been kin. Drashra lowered her head, not from submission, but because her gaze kept drifting to the hidden cave mouth far behind the gathering. Inside, in the shadows, for small forms huddled and weighted little bodies, fragile wings. Trembling her daughters, she would endure anything for them, even this. The males did not see the hatchlings. She had hidden them away before the punishment began. They saw only her great frame stripped of pride, and they reveled in it. They called her a failure. They called her cursed. In truth, she was powerful. Her wings could darken the sky. Her fire had carved valleys and boiled rivers, but tradition had reduced her to nothing. The measure of a dragon was not her strength, but the son she bore, and that she had disappointed them all. When the beating ended, they left her broken in the dust with a final decree. "Live if you can hide with your spawn. If you must, you are no longer the brood." The circle broke apart, wings beating thunder as they rose into the skies, leaving her with the echo of their derision. Her body trembled, her chest burned, but her spirit refused to break. Slowly dragging herself upright, she limped toward the cave. Inside, the air was cool and damp. A hatchling stirred when she entered, and 4 pairs of luminous eyes met her own. They chirped soft, anxious sounds, pressing against her scales, seeking comfort. She lowered her head around them, curling her body to shield them from the world outside. Her breath came ragged, but she whispered, "You are mine. You are not shame. You are not curse." They pressed closer, soothed by her words, though their little bodies shook from hunger and fear. Time passed, though she could not measure how long. Days, perhaps. Her wounds knitted slowly, her fire dulled by weakness. She hunted when she could, stealing small prey for her daughters, but the effort drained her more each time. She was strong, yet alone in strength. Without a tribe was a slow death. Still she refused to abandon them. For every mouthful of meat she tore, she thought of their survival. She would endure as long as she must. Unseen by her eyes, another had noticed a human who lived far beyond the borders of the dragon territories, tended to his work in silence. His name was Elias, and his world was bees. He had built rows of hives across the meadow near the forest edge, where the flowers bloomed brightest. He wore a veil of mesh against their stings, and carried smoke in a small device to calm them. The bees moved with harmony, 1,000 wings buzzing in perfect order. Each knew its place, each valued the queen who gave them life. Elias was no warrior. He bore no armor save the leather gloves that kept stings from his hands. His body was lean from labor, his skin browned by sun. His days passed in quiet ritual, tending the hives, collecting honey, mending wooden frames. He spoke little, for there was no one to speak to. The bees were his companions, their order a solace to a man who had seen enough of chaos and war in years past. It was while gathering wildflowers beyond his meadow that he saw her first. She was stretched across the rocks near the canyon mouth, a dark shape against the crimson stone. Her wings sagged, her breath shallow. Elias froze, his basket of blossoms dangling at his side. He knew at once what she was, and every instinct urged him to retreat. A dragon, even wounded, was death to a man. Yet he did not run. Instead, he watched. He saw the tremor of her sides with every breath. He saw the faint stir of shadows near her body, shaped smaller, weaker, like children hiding behind their mother. His eyes narrowed. Not prey. He realized then what had been done. The marks across her body were not from battle, but from deliberate cruelty. Her own kind had inflicted those wounds. Something stirred in him, then not fear, but a slow, simmering anger. He had known the sight of cruelty in human wars. He had watched soldiers break the weak for no reason but pride. He had walked away from it, vowing never again to be a part of such a world. And yet here it was mirrored in a creature not human at all. He returned to his meadow that evening with the vision still etched in his mind. He fed his bees, he sealed jars of honey. Yet the image of the dragon lingered in the quiet of his cabin. He sat long into the night, Listening to hum of wings outside his window, he thought of the queen in her hive cherished, and defended though she produced only daughters, he thought of the brood that had cast aside their own queen, because she bore no son the injustice gnawed at him. When morning came, he carried a jar of honey in his pack and walked back toward the canyon. His steps were measured, his heart steady. He had no plan, only a conviction that leaving her to die was no different than striking her himself. When he reached the rocks again, the dragon lifted her head, eyes narrowing molten gold, fixing on him, her lips curled in warning, a low growl rolling from deep in her chest. Elias stopped and set the jar on the ground before her. He said nothing. He simply lowered himself to sit on a stone a few paces away, his hands resting open at his sides. The dragon watched him, suspicious and silent, her body tense, ready to strike. Yet she did not. She sniffed the air. Her gaze, flicking to the jar, the scent of sweetness reached her, and confusion crossed her features. She did not touch it, not yet. Elias remained still. He was patient. He had spent years with bees, learning the virtue of calm stillness. He would wait. The dragon finally huffed a breath, smoke curling from her nostrils, and lowered her head again to shield the tiny shadows moving near her wings. Elias glimpsed them more clearly, then four small forms curling against her side. For daughters, their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. He exhaled slowly. His choice had been the right one. This was not a monster. This was a mother abandoned and punished for her children. And in that moment, Elias felt a quiet certainty take root. He would not turn away. He could not. The dragon closed her eyes, though her body remained tense. Elias rose slowly, leaving the honey jar. Where it was, he walked back to the meadow, the hum of bees greeting him like old friends. His steps were steady, his mind unshaken. Tomorrow he would return. The canyon lay quiet again, but the dragon lifted her head once more and stared at the jar in silence. When Elias returned the next morning, the jar of honey was gone. The ground bore faint scratches where heavy claws had shifted, but no trace of the dragon herself remained. He placed another jar at the same spot and settled onto the stone. As before, the air buzzed faintly with bees following him from the meadow, as if curious about his strange errand. He waited for hours, the sun creeping high, until finally his shadow rippled across the canyon floor. Drashera descended with a weary sweep of her wings. Her movements lacked the power of a healthy dragon. Yet even in weakness, she carried an aura of majesty. Her gaze locked on the jar, then on the man, who sat without flinching. A low growl rumbled in her throat, smoke drifting from her nostrils. Elias did not move. He let the silence stretch until hatchlings tumbled from behind her legs. Their chirps echoed softly as they sniffed toward the sweet scent. Drashera snapped her jaws in warning, and they froze. Her eyes narrowed on Elias, wary of every breath. He took, yet the man only gestured slowly to the jar for them. He said his voice was calm, steady, like the hum of bees drifting through meadow air. The dragon cocked her head, as if puzzled by the audacity of words so plain. She lowered her muzzle toward the jar, pried it open with delicate claws, and sniffed. The scent was rich golden. The hatchlings chirped louder. She let them taste, first cautious. Their tiny tongues darted across the thick amber, and their eyes brightened with surprise. Elias watched the scene unfold quietly. He made no move closer, but something in his chest eased at the sight. The daughters licked their claws, their bellies full. For the first time in days, Drashera tasted. Last, her tongue flicked the honey, and she paused as though the flavor challenged everything she knew. Her kind feasted on flesh and bone, never on such sweetness. Yet she swallowed again and again until the jar was empty. Her gaze lifted back to the man, and for the first time it carried not just suspicion, but a flicker of curiosity. The next day, Elias returned again. This time he carried meat, as well wrapped in cloth and smoked to last longer. He laid it beside the honey, then stepped back. The dragon watched from above, perched on a ridge. Her eyes burned bright with mistrust, but hunger pressed harder than pride. She landed with thud, wings folding tight, and sniffed the offering. She tore the meat apart, feeding her daughters first. Elias noticed the deliberate order her actions. She was no savage beast. She was a mother. Every bite she gave, and before herself, spoke louder than any words. As days passed, a rhythm emerged. Elias brought food, and honey. Drashera accepted without thanks, but without attack. Her growls softened to silence, though her eyes never ceased their sharp watch. The daughters began to creep closer to him, fascinated by the strange two-legged creature who arrived bearing sweetness. One even sniffed his boot once before darting back behind her mother. Elias did not reach out. He respected the distance. He knew the patience of bees had taught him well. At night in his cabin, Elias thought her often. He thought of the scars across her scales, a hollowness in her eyes when she shielded her young. He had seen women in war camps with the same hollow gaze, stripped of dignity by cruelty beyond reason. Yet this was no human woman. This was a creature of fire and sky. And still he could not turn away from her plight. He did not yet know what would come of this fragile bond, but he knew he was already bound to it. Drashera, too, found herself conflicted. Her instincts screamed that this human was prey, weak flesh, easily torn, yet another voice whispered of his strained persistence. He did not flee from her. He did not strike her. He did not mock her daughters or call them curse. He gave freely and waited silently. This puzzled her. Her kind valued dominance and cruelty. He valued something else she could not yet name. She watched him from the ridge even after. He left curious against her will. One evening, Elias remained longer than usual. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the canyon. He set down his basket and spoke for the first time beyond a word or two. "My name is Elias." His voice was quiet but steady. "I keep bees. I live alone. I saw what they did to you, and I will not turn away." Drashera stiffened at the sound of his voice directed at her. She bared her teeth, but no growl came. Instead, she asked why. Her voice cracked deep, like stone breaking from a cliff. The sound startled him, but he answered, "Because it was wrong." The simplicity unsettled her. Dragons measured right and wrong by strength, not by fairness. Yet this human spoke as though morality was a weight heavier than claws. She turned away, unable to hold his gaze, but her mind circled the word wrong as if it were fire against her scales. In the days that followed their exchange, though words remained sparse, Elias spoke little himself. But when he did, his stories were simple. He told of the bees, how they worked together, how they defended their hive with fierce devotion, how they served a queen who gave them life. Drashera listened despite herself. The idea of society that revered daughters instead of discarding them gnawed her pride and her sorrow. She looked at her hatchlings and, for the first time, wondered if perhaps strength could be measured differently. One evening, as Elias prepared to leave, he noticed movement at the canyon rim, figures dark against the fading sky. His pulse quickened. He knew the silhouettes, at once dragons, not like her, but armed with armor, and hungered. Drashera noticed, to her body, tense wings spreading wide over her young. She hissed low, and furious smoke pouring from her throat. Elias saw the fear in her eyes beneath the rage. They had come to finish what they started. He looked at her, then at the hatchlings trembling beneath her wings, and felt the decision crystallize like honey sealing in comb. He could walk away and live, or he could stay and stand beside her. He thought of the queen in his hive, cherished by her daughters. He thought of the brood that would crush Drashera and her children simply for being female. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the oncoming shadows. The hunters had not yet descended, but their presence loomed like a storm. Drashera growled, ready to fight. Though her wounds had not fully healed, Elias's voice was low but firm. "They will come soon. You cannot face them alone." Her eyes narrowed at him, confused by the courage of such a fragile body. But she did not tell him to leave. She only lowered her head close enough that her hot breath washed across his face. "If you stand, you will burn with me." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "Then I burn." The word struck her deeper than any blow from her kin. For the first time, she saw not prey, not weakness, but something she could not define. A man who chose fire for the sake of children, not his own. He turned and began preparing the small tools. He carried smoke canister, leather gloves, a jar of honey. Drashera watched bewildered as the human readied himself for a battle. He could not hope to win, and yet his calm never wavered. The night deepened, shadows lengthened, and the hunters drew nearer. Drashera curled her body tighter around her daughters, her wings stretching wide. Elias stood beside her, the hum of bees faint in the distance. Carried on a breeze together, they waited for the storm to break. The hunters came with the weight of tradition behind them, their wings blotting the pale light of the moon. As they descended, their armor gleamed faintly. Iron plates strapped to scales, and their voices rang with certainty that their mission was just. They had come not only to kill, but to proclaim again that weakness had no place in the brood. Drashera snarled as they landed, their talons raking stone. Her daughters whimpered beneath her chest, but she did not move aside. Her body arched, high wings unfurling wide to make a wall of scale and bone between them, and the hunter's smoke coiled from her throat, glowing faint with fire. The hunters sneered, unimpressed. "You were warned," one growled, his voice deep and cold. "For daughters, and still you dare cling to life. You dishonor us all." His gaze flicked to the hatchlings cowering in shadow, and his lips curled into a cruel smile. "We will cleanse the shame." Elias stepped forward before Drashera could answer. He carried no weapon, but his smoker still glowed faintly with embers, and in his other hand he held a jar of honey. The hunters paused, their amusement briefly overtaken by confusion at the sight of a man standing at the side of an outcast. "You have no place here, human." The leader spat, "Step aside or be crushed." Elias's voice carried clear though quiet. "You will not touch them." The hunters roared with laughter. Their mockery echoed across the canyon, and one swung his tail in contempt, shattering a boulder into shards. Elias did not flinch. His eyes met their steady. As stone his life was fragile, his body frail, yet something in his calm made Drasher's chest tighten. The leader lowered his head until his fangs glistened inches from Elias. "Do you value your life so little?" he hissed. "What can a man of flesh do against dragons?" Elias lifted the jar and set it on the ground before him. "What I can," he said, "and what I must." He tipped the smoker, releasing a cloud of white haze that drifted outward. Bees stirred in the distance, drawn by the scent of their keeper. Their hum began faint and grew stronger, a living chorus answering his call. The hunters snorted dismissive, yet their eyes flickered uneasily at the sound. Drasher felt her own fire stir, not from hunger for battle, but from the courage of the man beside her. If he would stand unarmed against her kin, then she would not falter. She drew in a great breath, and fire roared from her jaws. The blaze lit the canyon walls, and the hunters staggered back against a sudden fury. Battle erupted. Drasher lunged her claws, striking stone and scale. Elias darted between the shadows, smoke swirling, bees swarming at his call. They stung at eyes and wings small, but relentless the hunters lashed their tails, their wings beating storms of dusty air filled with thunderous roars, the clash of scale, and the frantic hum of thousands of wings. One hunter swung low, striking Elias across the chest. He crashed to the ground, the breath torn from his lungs. Drasher's heart seized. She roared in fury, striking the attacker. With all her strength, fire poured from her throat, engulfing him until he fled screaming. Wings alight, the scent of charred iron filled the air. Another hunter dove for the hatchlings, but Elias forced himself to rise. He staggered to the jar of honey, shattered across the ground, and the bees swarmed in a frenzy, drawn by sweetness. They clouded the hunter's face, stinging. Without mercy the beast thrashed, blinded and shrieking, until Drasher's talons tore him down. Pain racked Elias's body, but he did not stop. He moved with quiet resolve. Every step meant to shield the daughters that were not his blood. Drasher fought with renewed ferocity, her wings hammering her kin, her claws rending their armor. She bled, but she did not yield. She felt Elias at her side, not as prey, but as ally. At last the remaining hunters faltered. Their leader glared with burning hatred, wings beating hard as he rose into the night. "You will regret this, outcast," he roared. "The brood will not forget." With a final hiss of fire, he vanished into the sky. His followers, limping after him, the canyon fell silent save for a crackle of scorched stone and the low hum of bees drifting back to their hive. Drasher collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her daughters pressed against her unhurt, but terrified she looked to Elias and saw him sprawled on the ground, his chest rising shallow, his face pale with pain. She crawled to him, lowering her great head until her breath warmed his skin. He opened his eyes, weak but steady, and whispered, "They live." Her throat tightened. She had never known a man could choose to fight like this, not for power, not for glory, but for survival. Those who were not his own. His frail body bore wounds, his blood staining the dust, yet his gaze carried no regret. She felt something shift inside her, a vow forming unspoken. He had stood for her and her daughters. She would not let him fall. She lifted him carefully with her claws, holding him as gently as her strength allowed. She carried him into the cave where her daughters huddled. She laid him on the ground and curled around him, all her body a wall of warmth and protection. Her fire guttered low, but her spirit blazed bright. She whispered, "Rest, human, you have earned more than their scorn. You have earned my fire." Elias closed his eyes, breathing ragged but peaceful. The hatchlings crept closer, sniffing at him, chirping. Curious, Drasher watched them, then looked at the man and felt a strange calm. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. The hunters would return, perhaps stronger, perhaps with many, yet she knew one truth clearer than fire. She was not alone anymore. The night deepened around them, silence broken only by the steady hum of bees still circling near the canyon mouth, drawn to the honey spilled in battle. Their song wove through the darkness, a promise of harmony in the midst of ruin. Drasher listened and felt her heart stir with something she had thought lost hope. Elias drifted between pain and waking, his breath shallow, each movement tearing fire through his ribs. Drasher crouched over him, her wings arched high, as though she could shield him from the very air itself. Her daughters clung to her side, their eyes wide and frightened. They chirped softly, watching the still form of the human who had bled for them. Drasher felt the weight of her choice heavy in her chest. She had fought her kin for this fragile life, and now she would not let it fade. Through long hours she tended him, awkwardly shifting water toward his lips, hunting small prey to cook, as she had seen him do with fire. He ate little, but he endured, his eyes opened each day, and each time he looked at her with the same steady calm that had carried him into battle. His words came weak, but certain. "I will not leave you." Her heart clenched each time. She did not know why his voice struck her more than flame or steel, Yet when he spoke of bees and their queen and the strength of daughters, she felt something within her shift like stone breaking to reveal light. He was showing her a truth her kind had never spoken, that worth did not lie in sons alone, that daughters could be the hive and the future. As the days passed, Elias regained strength. He rose slowly, first with her support, then alone, though his body still bore deep bruises and cuts. He walked among the meadow where his bees labored. The hum comforted him, and the daughters followed shy at first, then bold. He showed them the hives. He opened a frame dripping with golden honey, and laughed when they licked it from her claws. Drasher watched him, and for the first time in her life, she felt pride, not shame, when her daughters laughed. But peace could not last. The hunters had fled, yet their words had carried the brood, would not let defiance pass unanswered. One evening the sky darkened with the beating of many wings. Shadows poured across the horizon. Dozens of dragons, armored and fierce, the brood had come in force to cleanse what they saw. As a stain, Drasher arose with a roar of fire bursting from her throat. Her daughters whimpered and pressed against her, but she stood tall, wings spread wide. She would not flee, she would not bend. Elias stood at her side, his smoker hung at his belt, his jar of honey. Ready, his eyes held no fear, only resolve. He looked at her and spoke quiet but firm. "We stand together." The brood landed their leader, the front, a colossal beast with scales black as obsidian. His eyes glowed with cold judgment. "You defy us still," he thundered. "You consort with prey you raise, daughters, as if they matter you will burn, and the hive you cherish will scatter." Drashera's voice shook the canyon. "These daughters are mine. They are not cursed. They are strength. They are future." She lowered her head, fire coiling in her throat. "And this man is not prey. He is more than you will ever be." The brood roared their fury, and the battle began. Fire lit the sky, molten streams clashing in the air. Drashera leapt to meet them, her claws rending her kin, her wings battering them from the sky. She fought with a fury born, not a pride. Beloved Elias moved among the chaos smoke, billowing bees surging in black clouds around the attackers. They stung eyes, and wings drove armored beasts in confusion. His body bled anew, but he did not stop. Every strike he made was for her and the children. The black-scaled leader crashed against Drasher, their bodies slamming like thunder's fangs sawed her throat. His claws tore her wings. She cried out, but held fast. Her daughters screamed behind her. Elias saw her falter, and without thought he ran forward. He hurled the last jar of honey, shattering it across the leader's face. Bees swarmed in a frenzy, blinded by sweetness. The beast thrashed and roared, and in that moment Drasher struck with all her fire. The blaze engulfed him, searing through iron and scale until he toppled to the stone broken. The remaining dragons faltered. Their leader lay ruined, their armor scorched, their eyes stung by swarms. They beat their wings and fled into the night. The sky, clearing his silence, fell over the canyon. Drasher panted, her body scorched and bleeding, but she still stood. Her daughters rushed to her, pressing against her scales, cry with relief. She lowered her head to Elias, who leaned against a stone, gasping, his body trembling but alive. Their eyes met, and for the first time there was no barrier between them, only truth. She whispered, "You stood when none would. You gave me more than survival. You gave me future." Elias placed his hand against her scarred muzzle, his voice rough but steady. "And you gave me a reason to live again." The daughters gathered around him, their small wings brushing his legs, their eyes bright with new hope above them. The stars stretched endless, and for the first time Drashera looked at the sky not with dread but with promise. She had been beaten and cast aside for giving life to daughters, but with one human she had found a new path together. They had forged a hive stronger than any brood. The night air hummed with bees returning to their hives. The sound wove with the crackle of fading fire, a song of survival and renewal. Elias and Drasher stood side by side, their wounds deep, but their spirits unbroken. The brood would not forget, but neither would they yield from the bond of man, and dragon a new strength had been born. And in the quiet after battle the daughters laughed again, their voices carrying to the canyon like the first true dawn.